And so the whole reason why we need this idea of universal design is because when we're creating a new piece of technology, when we're creating a new business, when we're creating a new system or a service, we're often working within a very limited framework. What we all try to do, although we shouldn't, is imagine what we would be like using that piece of technology. How would we use it? Rather than what we should be doing, which is working with others. Now, universal design isn't just about human-computer interaction or user-centered design. You may have heard these terms before. Universal design is not about that. Because what matters in universal design is the human that you put at the center of the design process. Now, a lot of technologies, especially ones made in the US and in Europe, are made by people who look, act, think, and who have the same background as me. They're people who've grown up with technology, who've gotten an education in computer science or some similar field. They've gone on to open a business and make technology as their product. And what we've come to, the point we've come to now in society is that there's universal agreement that making technology by people like me, for people like me, means that we're excluding a lot of other groups of people in the process. So universal design flips that whole idea on its head. And it basically takes people like me, not out of the equation completely, but it decenters people who, like me, have a lot of privilege. And it recenters the focus in the design and the development process on people who are socially excluded, who are marginalized, who may not be part of the power elite. They're part of people who every day are just working to kind of make their lives better. It's about community. It's about the individuals who are trying to make something happen at the grassroots. And that's why universal design is so important, because right now we have technology made for everyone, but made by a very narrow, small group of people. And what we want is actually technology made for everyone by people who reflect the great diversity of what it is to be a human being. And that includes people like you. So I want you to really think critically as we're going through the next few days together. I want you to really think critically about how your solutions, how your designs, how the ideas that are part of the innovations that you're creating, how those can be available, accessible, usable, affordable for everyone, and not just people like me. Universal design is based on that premise that we should be creating technology that everyone can use equally. But there's a few principles that I want you to kind of keep in mind. Every few hours, just try to revisit these in your head that form the basis of a universal design process. So those 4 principles, let's rattle them off right now. Number 1, equality. Number 2, diversity. Number 3, accessibility. And number 4, participation. Let's go into a little bit of detail on what that means. Equality. Are we creating our products and services? Are we creating our innovations in a way that are equally usable, accessible, affordable, available to everyone? Equal access for everyone. Or are we creating our solutions in a way that forces certain groups of people into positions where they can't use it, where they can't afford it, or where it's just not available to them? Now, I want to caution you right off the bat. A lot of engineers get really hung up on this because they say, Anthony, that's impossible. We could never do this. And you're right. In some respects, we'll never be able to universally design something to 100%. But what we can try to do is, as much as possible, ensure that we universally design at the highest level possible. And so equality is a basic framework for how we understand our innovations, how we take our innovations from the idea stage into the implementation stage. Where does equality fit in? Second principle is diversity. So it's not just about equality broadly, but it's looking at human diversity. And it's looking not just at diversity from a lens that, well, we have here someone who's a racial or ethnic minority. We have here someone who's an older person. We have here someone who's a younger person. We have here someone who's poor. We have here someone who lives in a rural environment. We have here someone who has a disability. It's not about that. It's about understanding the whole individual, and that any of these categories that I've just described could be coexist in a single person. And when we universally design something, we take that person, a person who is highly marginalized, what we call extreme users. We put them at the center of the design process. And there's a reason why we do this. Because when we make it work for someone who is marginalized to the greatest extent, then it will work better for everyone. So let's just take an example. If we make your product, your service, your innovation usable by someone with a disability, it will be usable by people without disabilities. Now let's add a layer to that, right? So one of the things we know based on research, ample amount of evidence going back to the 1950s, I think, is that women experience different levels of access to technology than men. So men have higher levels of access to technology than women. And this is almost ubiquitous around the world, even in a country like Norway, where I live. So we take disability, and we understand that people with disabilities also have lower levels of access to technology than people without disabilities. Now we combine these two characteristics and we say, we're going to put a woman with a disability at the center of our design process. What we catch in that method is any kind of barriers, any kind of challenges, any kind of problems that both women and people with disabilities might experience using or accessing our innovations. And that means we've captured a whole lot more challenges than if we just treat gender or we just treat disability on their own. We always have to take into account the whole person, as complex and beautiful and diverse and wonderful as they are. And of course, you can layer upon layer upon layer when it comes to education and language and income. And then we can talk about rural versus urban, because all of these are part of digital divides. All of these are part of basic levels of inequality when it comes to accessing and using technology. Third principle, accessibility. So I want to make a clear difference here. Universal design is not just about using something. It's also about accessing something. So it's no good to give someone access to the internet if they're not able to use a mobile phone or a computer or a laptop. It's no good to give them access to the internet if they can't do any of those other things. And it's no good teaching someone how to use a computer program if they don't have access to a computer. So I want you to think about your work, not just in terms of use. Is it usable? And is it usable by the broadest possible population? But is it also accessible to those individuals? Are any kind of preconditions met in order for them to use it? Again, universal design is about a theoretical world that we could live in, and we're never going to get 100%. But if we can get closer, that's the whole point of this. And last but not least is participation. Participation is such a critical element to universal design because it's not possible to design something for someone that we think might experience a barrier without involving them in the design process. So there's no way that I could sit in my imagination and go, I wonder what it would be like for a woman who is, 85 years old to use a computer in Zimbabwe. I wonder what that would be like. I would have no idea. There's no way for me to imagine how that person would experience accessing a piece of technology. So what I have to do in order to make sure that my technology is usable and accessible for individuals like her, so someone who is a woman, someone who lives in a rural area, someone who lives in sub-Saharan Africa, is work with individuals who experience those same kinds of barriers to bring them into the design process. And again, this is not just about involving everybody in the design process. It's about involving people who are the most marginalized, who experience the most barriers accessing or using technology. Are we clear? That's our setup. That's our premise for a lot of the activities we're going to be doing over the next 4 days. Give me some kind of life. I need thumbs up, or I need in the chat, say something, say some words in the chat. I just need to hear from you that there is something going on in your brains. Thank you, Victoria. I love the heart. Thank you, Alan. Dennis says yap in the chat. All right. Look, I thank you, Majid, for the thumbs up. James says some words. Fabulous, James. Well done, you. Look, I love interaction, so please fill up the chat with messages. Give me some reactions here, just so I'm not, because I'll get on my train and I'll just go, and I don't want to leave you guys behind. I want to make sure we're all going in the same direction together. So this really, really helps me. Thank you. Well done, you. All right. So what do we want to talk about from here? Let's go now to some team building work. Since you guys don't have team, Nyakio, thank you for saying you're following this process. Actually, before we go into the team thing, I want to mention here, there's an Introduction to Universal Design course. If you go to universal.design, you can sign up for an Intro to Universal Design course. It's completely free, and it gives you the basics of universal design. So I do recommend this. I think it's a great opportunity for you to learn a little bit more. Pin it on your web browser, and let's move into the next section, because I don't want to spend too much more time on that.